see Jesus for who he is. This is how Mark writes his gospel. The ones closest to Jesus don't get it. But the ones that do get who understand Jesus is, it's usually from an unclean spirit, from a demonic type source, or something sort of bad. And our passage falls in that category. From the first 8 chapters, you have these unclean spirits getting it right. They say, Jesus, you are the Son of the Most High God. Those are the only sort of positive affirmations of who Jesus is until Peter's confession. And so, when you look at this guy in Mark chapter 5, this guy living among the tombs, to say he's in bad shape would be a gross understatement. There are a lot of clues in this text to show you how bad of shape he's actually in. So in your translation that you just read, the NIV, I believe it says the impure spirits. Some of your translations might say unclean spirits, like these things bothering this guy. So we got to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be unclean or impure? What would Jesus, the writer, Jesus' contemporaries, what would they have thought when you heard those things? Well, again, in your Old Testament, there were sort of gradations or like levels based on what you had done, what you had touched, even all sorts of things regarding your own body. They would put you in different categories based on those things. Like, for example, you could have like abomination, really, really bad on one side. Then you keep moving to one direction. Okay, now you're just unclean. You're getting better. Through certain sacrifices or talking to a priest, you might could be made clean. Then you keep going. You could be like holy and set apart for the Lord. And the people, Israelites, would have moved on that spectrum based on various things. Again, what they did, said, touched, and even their very body itself. And so you're not talking about when someone's impure or unclean. It's not like you just sneeze into your hands, you want to hold someone's baby. And this is like ritualistically religious, has a lot of deep things going on. It's more of a, have you ever been like really underdressed to an event? Like really underdressed, and you just sort of feel that deep sense of shame and like, I am not fit to be here. It's a terrible feeling. Now, I had 3 sisters and a mom that cared deeply how I dressed, and my wife, fortunately, that usually doesn't happen to me. I can ask, is this appropriate? You sort of get that look, like, ugh, that's not. So the cue is given. Okay, I need to get cleaned up more. It's that type of feeling to where we'd have to make certain changes, again, according to Old Testament law, according to a priest, to sort of move from you're in really bad shape to be made clean or to get holy. And the point was for an Israelite to live in this holy, purely devoted to Yahweh. Like, again, Israel was called to live fully devoted to their God in all these ways, holy, set apart, so that they would be a light to the nations. This guy is like bad, bad, bad. He's not anywhere close. So if you were to walk through this text very carefully, we start in Gentile territory. That Gerasenes language, this is not sort of Jewish land. So like by default, Gentiles are sort of dirty, unclean, impure people out of the gate. So he's living already among those. Secondly, he lives among the dead. If you were to touch like a dead body, and according to Jewish law, you have to do certain things, separate yourself from the community to make yourself clean. So like there were all sorts of laws regarding the closeness, proximity, touching of dead bodies. Well, he lives among the dead. He's probably coming into some close contact with dead bodies, would have been unfit for anything. Then you notice we're in pig, swine country. Remember those weird Jewish laws? You can't eat shellfish. They couldn't eat pigs because it wasn't a cud chewer with the cloven foot hoofs, all that stuff. He's living among dirty Gentile animals as well, okay? He's also filled with an unclean, impure spirit, and not just one, many. So even he's got some supernatural stuff going on in him in a bad way, and he's a danger to himself and others in the community. Again, so much of Israel's law was given so they would be an actual safe place, like a safe, godly community. That whole famous verse, love your neighbor as yourself, that's from Leviticus. It's like Leviticus 19 that Jesus quotes. That was part of your Old Testament law. So this guy is a danger to himself and the community. So if you're checking the boxes, this guy is really, really in bad shape. And in Jesus' time, those sort of gradations that I mentioned to you, there's basically just 2. You're either sort of holy and good, it's kind of like those old 80s movies, or you're really unclean and you're doomed. So they had been reduced to 2 broad categories. This guy clearly fits the worst one. There's not a whole lot of hope from him if you're just looking as an outsider. Like he's checked all the boxes and looks really bad. Now, if you're a curious reader, And I am going to do a Q&A after this, but don't ask me these things. I'm getting ahead of it, Like, let's try to answer this. Like, you might have a lot of peculiar questions. Like, well, what's up with these demons going into the pigs and going into the sea? What happens to them? We don't know. Now, I think last time I was here, I plugged the Bible Project, Spiritual Beings, and some of that stuff. Like, there's a 6-part video series. I would still commend that to you. But again, like, why? What to make of these demons that go into pigs, go into the sea? Where do they go after that? We don't know. You're a better reader of your Bible if you go on what the author actually gives you. As curious as those questions are, and I have them too, Mark doesn't tell you. Okay? And why did Jesus let so many pigs die? Like, doesn't Jesus care about people's livelihood? Like these herdsmen, doesn't he care about creation? The Bible does care about creation. Like creation care for the earth and for animals is actually in the scriptures. But Jesus also does affirm in the Sermon on the Mount that people are more valuable than birds, etc. And so like he does have a sort of a plane in that sense. But again, that's not the point. You're raising your hand like, gosh, like he really killed these people's livelihood. That's fair. But that also happens in other places in the scriptures too. Some of you know the famous passage in Acts when the gospel is going forth, the silversmiths are put out of business because they don't want to buy idols anymore. That it ruptures their economy. That happens. Sometimes when the kingdom goes forth, the actual landscape is changed. That's not unusual. But again, that's not the point here. So if you're just wondering, gosh, does Jesus care about pigs, animals, or people's livelihood? He does. That's not what's going on here. Okay. So what do I want you to actually take from this text? It's one main, primary, simple point. Okay. In verse 17, do you notice what happens after most of this? What are the people doing? Like, please leave Jesus. Like, Jesus, get out of here. Now, again, what we just said, we're not totally sure why there was that reaction. But the previous verse or so, you are told that they're told about the pigs, told about this guy being put in his right mind. I think you can sort of let your imagination be your guide. Like at the very least, their economy has been disrupted. So like, gosh, you're told like a huge herd of pigs was destroyed. Like, okay, something is a little off here. Jesus, like you disrupted things too much. Again, you're not sure. This is speculation. But also, in Jesus' day, it would be very normal for a community to have like a community scapegoat of sorts. And we did this all the time. You say, as bad as your life may be, you can usually find somebody worse. At least I'm not as bad as that guy. At least we're not as bad as that group. Like it's kind of nice to have those things to point to. When that is removed, that can upset a community. That very well could have been what's going on here. All of a sudden, the community scapegoat has been made right. The people don't like it. But again, little speculation here. Proceed with caution. But that would be my guess, just as using your biblical imagination, what's going on. But what should we take from this? As we started out, it's very tempting to write others off these days for all sorts of reasons. And I actually see this as a pastor a decent amount. And it usually works it out in something like this. You have a neighbor, and we would all say you're called to love your neighbor. You have an actual neighbor you live by, right? Called to get to know them, called to love them, called to serve them. I've had people in my church tell me things like this. I can hardly get to know my neighbor, much less I can't look at them straight because they were on the other side of fill-in-the-blank political issue. That happens from both sides. That's doing the Christian life wrong. To write off your neighbor because they're on some other spectrum of a political or otherwise, again, you fill in the blank, that's not the way to live as a Christ follower. So you'd be tempted to write others off these days, what I'm finding everywhere. This picture in Mark 5 shows us that no one is actually too far gone, that there are no lost causes when it comes to Jesus and his kingdom. There's a biblical expression in the Old Testament, is God's arm too short? Because is God's arm too short to do this thing? Can he actually say what he, or can God actually deliver on what he said he would? That's what I want you to really take from this particular passage. And consider how far he comes. Again, if you're a Jew or an Israelite living in Jesus' day, you're checking every conceivable box for this person to write him off. Like he's so far gone, it's laughable. And then consider in verse 15 what happens to him. He is now sitting. You're given all these descriptions, right? Again, when the Bible gives you the details, your ears should perk up. Like he's sitting almost like a symbol of rest, right? So now this guy is finally sitting. He's clothed. He's been like put coverings on. He's in his right mind. And he actually longs to follow Jesus, which is fascinating. Like he wants to follow Jesus in the discipleship sense. Like, I want to go with you. And even more so, what's fascinating is just this person, he becomes this lay, open-air preacher. There's 10 cities, the Decapolis, that's what's going on, east of the Jordan River. He's like one of the first preachers of the good news of Jesus, of what Jesus can do, is doing, and will do for others. He's one of the first one in the Gospel of Mark that is given such status. Telling others what Jesus has done for him, had mercy on him, and everyone marvels at his testimony. Now, so again, if you're tempted to write people off, you shouldn't. This should give us actual real hope as far as who is Jesus is able to reach. But also, I think it screams out, what do people actually need? Again, in our day and age, so many opinions, people talking at each other, screaming at or talking past, and making very, very big meta-narrative type claims. Like, what's the most important thing? What is foundational to all of reality? What really matters? For the Christian, we would say for fallen people, people that have joined the rebellion, that are unclean on our own, that can't clean ourselves up, that are desperate, the most important thing is the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ to be shown, and the life that flows out of that. That is most foundational, okay? That is what people actually need first and foremost. Then what I commend to y'all, Grace Trenton, Grace Community, in this lonely and fractured world, with so many people picking sides and writing other people off for various reasons, consider this guy. Don't write them off, and you can join him in his exemplary behavior and simply telling others what Jesus has done for you. And if you don't have the crazy testimony of this guy, that's okay. I grew up actually in the Baptist world, and so I always wanted that dark to light testimony. Give me the spiritual birthday. I was a drug dealer for 20 years. I heard a sermon. I was changed. If that is your story, great. I'm glad Jesus did that. But if you grew up in a Christian home and it's somewhat normal and you don't know a day outside of Jesus, you should celebrate that. But Jesus has still served you in profound ways, and it's worth giving it some thought and how. And it could even be just simply giving you godly parents that love you. That could be one of those things. But if you feel like you're also yourself are beyond help, if you feel like you are too far gone, you should also consider this passage for yourself. If you feel like someone you love or someone that you really struggle to love is beyond help, you should consider this passage. Here you just have a simple picture of Jesus of Nazareth, Son of the Most High God, intimately, personally making someone whole again in every sense of the word. That you would have written off, that seemed like he had no hope for. This is what Jesus is in the business of doing. And again, this is freeing to me in the sense of what he goes out and tells people is what Jesus has done. He's not on a mission to fix people himself. He's not on a mission to say the right words, silver bullets, where they might get it. He's just simply testifying to what Jesus has done. That is what I would invite you to do. Simply tell others what Jesus has done in your own life and point others to Jesus, because that is what they actually need. Any other attempt to sort of make yourself whole or healthy or clean on your own, those are all very, very futile attempts. And if you ever try to do it, something I struggle with myself, I can just clean myself up. It is always a very fruitless effort and exhausting. To embrace Jesus and what he is able to do is a very, very freeing life. And so my hope for you, 2 points primarily, I'll leave you with this and I'll stop. Again, don't write anyone off. Let the scriptures be your guide. Consider Jesus is able to reach anyone. Secondly, join him in this example of telling others what Jesus has done. That's the only hope they actually have, is Jesus himself. You can join him in being this lay, open-air proclaimer of the good news of Jesus. God give us all help. That is the end of what I have here. Now, I've always wanted to do a Q&A after a sermon. I can't do it at North Shore Fellowship because we have 3 services that kick us out. Like, gotta go. And we're large enough to where it might really get off the rails if we open it before. But I've heard y'all pray before. This is a great, wonderfully savvy community. But I am open to questions, thoughts, curiosities, pushback, just for a few minutes. Got a microphone? But yeah, anything that strikes you or anything confusing about the law, unclean stuff, what's going on, how can I be of help?
Just one thing. I'm not 100% sure, but when you're talking about why the townspeople might have asked Jesus to leave, I've heard other stories from other parts of the Bible where they were afraid of him because they thought he was of hell or of Satan,
Yeah.
rather than of God. And since he was dealing with these demons, maybe that was one reason. I don't know. That was just another possibility that I had heard from other places that might have been. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. So when Jesus does do some healings, sometimes he is accused of, I know Matthew's gospel has some of this, it's by the prince of demons that he cast out demons. So Jesus is accused of kind of being on, like, that he has control. So I think you're right. And again, the problem with Mark is, y'all know the shortest gospel. Mark is also, he gives you weird details. He doesn't give you details that you would expect. And so in this one, he like, you're not told why, but it's the previous sentence is why I think it might be a clue. They see him in his right mind, and they told him about the pigs. Then they're told to leave. So that's like the best clue you have, but he doesn't tell you exactly why. That's a good point. Yeah. Yes.
Yes. Then it is true that cleanliness is next to godliness.
Godliness. That's right. I've actually used that in a sermon before, and like that's got to be somewhat Old Testament related.
But maybe we can go as far to say is cleanliness is godliness.
Yes, depending on how you might define cleanliness, and that's, again, that is what is being communicated in your baptism. Jesus is saying, I am washing you clean. He is declaring you to be clean, and actually listening to that, like taking that seriously, so you can actually live freely versus, again, trying to clean yourself up. I think you have a lot of fun with that one. But if it's in the physical sense, my kids are doomed. If they have to be clean in that sense. But, yes.
Hey, sorry, my allergies are freaking rotten this morning. I just love how your sermon tied into what I was reading in 1 Samuel 2 about how Saul got his calling and God changed his heart, but then when it was time to make him king, he was hiding. And I got really convicted because, I feel like I've been hiding in my faith. I haven't told anybody about Jesus or my testimony in so long. So I just love how you encourage me to do that.
Yeah, and again, y'all, I assume we're in the Bible Belt. That many of you probably have Baptist backgrounds. That's fine. Again, that's how I grew up. I've had the most success with neighbors and people that they were convinced that I loved them first, and they would hear me out. So you don't have to bombard your coworker if you've never said a word to them with your testimony. You can do that. Sometimes that bears fruit. So I'm not saying that's always wrong, but if you do have any relationship capital, people that you've loved or got to know in any context, you might be surprised when you share your testimony about how they respond. So anyway, thank you for saying that. Trent, good to see you.
Good to see you
Saw him
too.
at General Assembly, and his wife.
Joy.
I was going to say Kim. Yeah, good to see you all again.
Good to see you too. I just want to share just how convicting and necessary it was for me to hear this passage in this story, and because I just run into, it's convicting because I've thought that people were too far gone before, both people, well, in my line of work, I just encounter people that kind of look like this, kind of often, and I think that awful thoughts of the people in that region, I guess, and it's just so convicting that I would think that, and it gives me hope to see that Jesus doesn't think that at all, and gives us gives us this pertinent example, like you said, the first proclaimer of the gospel is this guy in Mark, and I don't know, it's just impactful. It's going to stick with me. I'm really thankful that you brought it up, so thank you.
Yeah, man. Our old pastor, Robbie Holt, who was very endeared to a lot of people in Chattanooga, y'all probably don't know him, but he's one of those guys where when he pursued a call to ministry, he had a lot of people saying, really, that guy? He would have been, because of where he came from. And if you know Robbie, he's wonderful, But yeah, a lot of great stories out there. Yes.
I also it was helpful to think about, for those raised in a Christian home, and how do you think about that, and that the chasm for that person, between that person and God, is no smaller than the chasm between this guy and God.
Right.
And, our being in that context, that this guy, sorry, I'm fumbling a little bit, but that our righteousness also cannot save us.
Right.
That whatever righteousness we have, that we think we have by virtue of being in, a covenant home, being brought up in the church, all of those things are wonderful, because we get to hear, the gospel from such an early age, and it's not hidden from us like,
Right.
in God's providence, it is hidden from so many others, but that even that righteousness won't save us. And keeping that in mind, I think will help us keep a little bit of the method with the message as we try to go forth and show that grace, instead of, screaming at people about Jesus. There's no way to do that without sort of feeling like, well, it's because, I'm different and my righteousness will save me. But truly grasping that our righteousness doesn't save us, and that our chasm is no different from this guy's chasm. And that method is just as important as the message. And we see that in a lot of, places. This guy went out joyfully. I guarantee you he didn't go out, screaming at people
Right.
for, look what you're doing, look what you believe, look what you think. You don't care about life, you don't care about this. But,
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you tied that in. I think that was helpful.
Yeah, I would imagine Hutch just said something like this similarly, and it is true, but it doesn't work itself out. Like, if Christians actually believe what they say, that we're not saved by our works, that we're all doomed, left to ourselves, it is just Jesus' kindness and grace and righteousness given to us, and we'll flow out of that. We should be at least among some of the most humble, gracious, kind people. That is not always true, and when we fail at that, we can gladly own it, because again, we're not saved by our apology or lack thereof or anything else. I just mean that should be a marker, and for a lot of church history, it has been. I mean, Christians have actually had wonderful reputations in places for being such a people, but always worth considering. Yes, somebody got a
Yeah,
point.
I just really appreciate you drawing out all those aspects of Jewish law. And if the law can be seen too as restraining and binding, the people of the Decapolis and their laws couldn't save him. And the laws that isolated him from the Jewish law standpoint couldn't save him. And just as you're talking about people you give up on, those are the kind of two things we kind of approach people with. We either want to restrain them and bind them to look away, or we isolate them. And neither brings the salvation that this man needed for Jesus to intrude in his life. And I just really appreciate you drawing that out.
Amen. Good word.
I have another question. The scripture talks about the man not being in his right mind. So we might say in today's vernacular that he was crazy. And now he is in his right mind, so can we say that he has the mind of Christ? Can you draw a connection between that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's certainly on that trajectory. Again, the detail you're given is partly his unright mind had to be at least demon influenced a little bit, which for our world, if you see someone that you might call crazy or really mentally unhealthy or unstable, I don't think you should assume demoniac stuff, but that could be part of it. I think we should be open to that. But yes, I do think part of his right mind, again, the mind of Christ wouldn't sort of been in their vernacular at this time yet, but I think the Apostle Paul or whoever looking back would definitely say yes. Like he's been given this mind of Christ, and he's living out of that. So, how about one more, if we have one more? We'll wrap up. Good thoughts, everyone.
You're visiting, and we're new in town, so I think that's why I'm feeling brave to say something.
Well, welcome.
But, thanks. we've just left all of our family and dear friends, and this passage I think was encouraging to me because from the little bit of a different take on writing people off, we've left dear people back at home that we pray for every day for their salvation, including my dad and our neighbor who we just love very deeply. She is like family for us. And, this man was allowed to suffer for a time, and it was Jesus that came in Jesus' time and then redeemed him and saved him. So I think sometimes we can be discouraged that why hasn't God saved so and so yet? I was so convinced that he was going to save my neighbor before we left. And that was not his time. But he did. She and none of the people that we left are too far gone from that perspective either. He invites us into his work, but he doesn't require us to be in his work. But out of his grace and in his timing, then he brought that beautiful redemption story that we are now encouraged by even today. So,
Wow.
thanks.
Good word. Aaron and I, we left Orlando 10-ish years ago. We had dear friends there. There's one in particular